I'm Maraiga Bailey and I'm the Assistant Curator at IKON. I think it all depends on the type of gallery or museum. I think for an institution like IKON, it sees itself as like bringing artwork from all over the world to this region of the UK and seeing itself as enabling people to experience different cultures and ways of life. So if you look around the exhibition, there's not much in-gallery interpretation in terms of next to the artworks, and I think the kind of idea that IKON is going with is that they want people to engage with international ideas from their own kind of life experience. So we've had some people coming in and just appreciating the artwork for how it looks, but also people coming in and kind of noticing aspects of the artwork. So this artist, Britta Marakatt-Labba, is a Sami artist, and that culture revolves around a lot of hunter-gathering and living off the land, so fishing, herding reindeer. And people have come in from, we've had visitors from like northern Japan, and they've seen equivalents to their ways of life. These artworks here, they use, Britta's used like salmon skin, and the people who came in from northern Japan, they were saying that an indigenous kind of community in northern Japan called Anu people, they also use salmon skin in their artwork. So, and kind of seeing those bridges, across different cultures really. But I think IKON is quite individual in that respect, because a lot of other galleries that I've worked at in the past, they have a much more explicitly socially engaged vision. So it's quite interesting to come from galleries like that to IKON, because IKON's trying to foster this genuine engagement with the actual artists and artwork rather than incorporating explicit learning narratives and engagement narratives into its actual exhibitions. It's kind of seen, learning and engagement is seen as almost separate to the exhibitions here. The position of galleries is always changing, but I think it is the director who kind of leads, and Jonathan, our director, he's interested in indigenous art and quite a white cube gallery space. So the walls here at IKON, since I've been working here, have always been white, not much colour, and I think for some exhibitions that is quite effective. So for example, downstairs at the moment we have a Carlo Crivelli exhibition. It's a lot of like Venetian Renaissance altarpieces, and people from different museums that I've been showing around have said that it's been really interesting to see these altarpieces on white walls, because it makes you appreciate different sides of the art, different like aspects of the artwork, instead of it being in like a dark space with spotlights on. So yeah, I think IKON's role as a gallery is a bit more towards the contemporary side of things, and trying to create these contact zones through exhibiting artwork from different cultures. But yeah, I think IKON is a lot more on the side of, at least the exhibitions, is on the side of experience rather than interpretation. Over the past, like through my career, I guess, I've worked in different curatorial roles. At the moment at IKON, my role is a lot more supporting the creation of exhibitions. So I don't do much of the curating myself. That's Melanie and Jonathan, or external curators. So here I would see my role as more facilitating rather than producing exhibitions myself. So I guess in that respect, a lot of my role here is more towards a registrar. So that would be organising the transport, insurance and researching loans. But in the past, when I've been like a curator at different places. I've worked in a more kind of, I guess what we would class as a kind of typical curator, selecting loans, creating layouts, and creating in-gallery interpretation. But in terms of curatorial practice, I guess I would see, or I would aim for my own exhibitions to be, like, I have quite a passion for widening the debates around art, and I personally, coming from my own experience, I find it really useful to have quite a lot of information about artwork. Maybe that's because I studied art history and that's what I'm interested in, or maybe it's because when I went to galleries as a child I just had no idea what was going on, and when I saw these big contemporary artworks I was just like, what is this? So yeah, I think, and with that in mind, it's quite interesting working at IKON because the interpretation is so minimal, but I think it's because IKON attracts a much different audience than other places I've worked at. The audience here, I think the main age range is like 18 to early 30s. Whereas the places I've worked at in the past, especially if they charge for exhibitions, it's been over 60. So people of that age, perhaps they have a more specialist interest, and because they're paying for the exhibitions, you can kind of have a lot more interpretation because they're already interested in it, and you can talk about really specialist things. But yeah, and I think another kind of influential idea for my own curating has been this idea of contact zones. So kind of bringing together artworks and creating interpretation and interventions into exhibitions that kind of facilitate conversation, and thinking of art as, instead of just being something that someone should appreciate for the sake of it, trying to explicitly think of a use. So I've been involved in, not here but in previous roles, in like arts on prescription initiatives, and that's been really really rewarding, because you can kind of really get, you can really reach out to people in like for example in hospitals or prisons that you wouldn't be able, who can't come and visit the exhibitions. So I think that is something that's really nice to have as an outreach thing, but then I've also been quite keen to bring the opinions of and ideas of like collaborators. So in the past, working with people in prisons who can't visit the exhibitions, creating a space in the exhibition where they can have their own kind of text that they've written next to artworks they've liked, and in the past also kind of they've been like, I've gone out to prisons and worked with councils and taken copies of artwork, and then the prisoners have had art classes and they have like created artworks in response to artworks in exhibitions, and then we've had a space in the exhibition where we've displayed their artworks and sold their artworks. So that kind of, yeah, a little bit more socially engaged, but yeah, quite eclectic really. When I've worked with like prisoners and inmates in the past, it's mainly been with female prisoners, and I think that's been quite interesting because people come into exhibitions with, already they've got such a sympathy for them in their head, and the ethics around displaying artwork from inmates, we had to anonymise them, but then sometimes people put two and two together. They see a signature with quite a distinctive name. They know from the exhibition interpretation or online material where the prison, like the prison that the artworks in the exhibition have come from. And then we had a really interesting case where some visitors had figured out the artwork from a particular prisoner, and they really, really wanted to buy it because it was kind of like that morbid fascination. So it's just, yeah, it's just the ethics as well of showing different artworks is quite interesting. But at IKON, I think a lot of it is initiatives like reaching out to inmates. That is more learning than the exhibitions, and I think at the moment there's like a learning officer who, part of their role, specialises with working at inmates at HMP Grendon. Okay. And the exhibitions are held at the prison, not at IKON. So I think it's more to do with letting the inmates see the artwork rather than kind of displaying it to visitors outside. I feel like a lot of what I'm going to say is in real contrast to the exhibition we're sitting in, but I quite like thinking of an exhibition as like quite theatrical. Maybe that's because I've worked on a lot of historical exhibitions in the past. I quite like to think of like the staging of artworks and that first initial impression when people walk into the exhibition or change rooms in an exhibition. I think it's really important to have statement artworks that draw people in. So one of the exhibitions I worked on in the past at Sheffield Museums was about the Bloomsbury Group, and we had commissioned a contemporary artist to create artworks that responded to the loans we were getting from the National Portrait Gallery. So a lot of the Bloomsbury Group, white, middle class, British people whose kind of familial wealth was from Indian colonies, and the artist kind of researched people who were involved with the group but whose contributions have been overlooked, and due to race or class or kind of religion, and then those artworks were absolutely lovely to have in the exhibition, not only because, well, personally, they were a lot more interesting to look at than a lot of portraits that look the same, but because they were quite colourful and more creative than portraits from like 1920s, but also because we could use them to direct visitors around the exhibition. So, for example, like in the doorway there, we would have some of the artworks from the contemporary artist on the wall as soon as so visitors could see, and it would draw them in, and then we would have kind of the more historical portraits around, so it just kind of provided that kind of more kind of like a theatre aspect, but also it enabled visitors to kind of see something that was contemporary and then work out the historical links, rather than putting something that was historical in a famous artwork and then just kind of sidelining the contemporary work or putting it somewhere else in the exhibition. I quite like to think of it as more of like a exhibition staging. I think there's a lot of different things I found of being useful for that. So colour, exhibition design, how you configure walls to kind of create a flow of the exhibition, and then how you place your narrative within that. But on the flip side of that, I've also found exhibition design is like constrained by all these practical things such as access requirement, and then things like here at IKON that maybe aren't as considered, but things like conservation, controlling natural light. I think it is quite interesting because a lot of the time, for example, like I've found from personal experience, if an artwork is used in advertising, people like to see that quite close to the start of the exhibition, and it's things like that, as well as the things I've kind of already touched on, that are kind of these external factors that you need to kind of figure in when curating and placing artworks. But I think working with contemporary artists is completely different, especially if they're around for the install. They have their own ideas where they want things, and things become quite personal. For example, artworks that they've created over 20 years that no one else would really see the links between, they would want them all together, even though they look completely different. They've used different inspirations. It might just be that they've been all created in one place. So for example, one of the artists that's coming in the next lot of exhibitions, he's created works over the past 10 or so years but he wants to put artworks all together that look completely different. You couldn't really tell that they were all linked, but we're kind of doing it because it's his exhibition and we're just here to facilitate his ideas. So yeah, I think working with contemporary artists, you don't really have as much curatorial freedom as working with historical works, although then with historical works, like I've mentioned, you need to think of like light coming in through windows and block everything off, and the light levels, humidity, all these environmental and insurance things that start coming in. So I guess it's just like a balancing act, really.
Pros and cons.
Yeah. I studied at Manchester University, so I'm quite keen on their kind of idea of curating, kind of like Alistair Hudson's idea of useful art and useful curating. So one of the exhibitions that he curated that really made an impression on me was at Manchester Art Gallery, and I think it was called like something quite vague, like art, and it was about like art and mindfulness. But it was really, really interesting for me because I'd never seen an exhibition like it. It was basically, they had selected, I think, around 15 artworks from their collection, a lot of them quite historical, but they had like carpeted the exhibition, really comfy sofas, and they had like headphones that you could put on that had like guided meditations of the artwork, and instead of all these historical facts that coming from an art history background, I think you need to like plaster around the artworks. It was this much more relaxed, more kind of, it was getting more towards like a formalist approach to art, like asking you to notice things about how the artist had painted particular parts of the artwork, asking you to just focus on how it looked. And I think for me that was quite like revolutionary in a way, because I just thought you needed to give everyone loads of information and that's what they wanted. But I think in interventions like that, it's perhaps not the case. And I think, although sometimes initiatives of useful art can be a little bit clunky, in terms of the exhibitions really try to get across this concept of usefulness, and then on the flip side you're like, well, art is useful in itself as well. You don't need to tack something onto it. But yeah, I think that exhibition, yeah, was influential. I think currently it's most probably balancing the kind of needs of contemporary artists with the space. So working with contemporary artists who are quite early on in their career, perhaps they don't know and they're not familiar with like the deadlines that we need to meet and how I approach things in terms of administration. So I think it's just, yeah, trying to get that across and yeah, getting everything here on time. I think my favourite thing is most probably a specific thing or part of the role. I think my favourite thing is seeing the exhibitions kind of start going up on the walls when everything's uncreated and you see the artworks and you're like, oh, it's actually happening. But I think my favourite part of my role is I quite enjoy the kind of organisation part of it. I quite like organising all the transport. I know that sounds quite boring, but it's just like those kind of tasks that are quite rewarding in their own way. But in addition to that, there's all the research that we get to do, and visiting artist studios is amazing because you're seeing things that you wouldn't usually see, and you get an insight into how the artist works and the kind of physical constraints that the artwork is created in. So one of the artists we're working at the moment, there's quite a small studio, so it's thinking about how that impacts their work as well. So yeah.